Good morning. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is TravisShaddox. It is Valentine's Day 2024. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I'm wearing red, but it might show up as orange. I don't really know how it shows up on screen, but it's a red shirt in celebration of Valentine's Day. I hope everybody's doing well. We have been going over nitrogen, and we're going to continue to go over nitrogen today with a very easy to understand article. It's very interesting. Hang on one second. So it's a fun article today. I like straightforward articles. It's a newer article. It's only 10 years old. So look forward to that today. Good morning, Connecticut. Oh, okay. So Cuban and Dominican. So Cubanican. So I guess I'm saying that right. Louis Castellucci. Sounds Italian. Today's paper is from a journal in Europe. The editorial board has a lot of Italians on it. I think the journal is based out of Germany, I think. I'm not 100% sure about that. It's a journal that I've never actually published in, and it's not a normal journal for turfgrass science, but it is in Europe. I just don't know exactly what country. Wayne, good morning. Turf nerd, right in the middle of your Zoom meeting. Well, work comes first. This will always be on YouTube, so you can come back to me later, or on the podcast. So. Yeah, Chuck, you have a comment about a comment that you left yesterday. I do have it here on my email, or on my email. Whenever you comment, it sends me an email, and I can't explain it why the comment doesn't go in the video. I have no idea. It happens 5 or 10% of the time. I get a comment. Well, any comment you leave sends an email to me, but 5 or 10% of those never get posted on the video. I have no clue why that happens. It's not me. At least I'm not doing anything intentionally. Not that I know of, anyway. But I did get your comment. I'll reply to that. It sounds like maybe I already answered your question, mate. Perhaps, Chuck. But I wasn't when I read through your comment or question. I wasn't 100% clear, so I'm going to come back to it and look at the video again and see exactly what I said. If you need further clarification on that, I'll do it. I don't know. Next time I'm on, I suppose. Randy, Bulgaria. We said we may have Italy. No, we have Bulgaria. We have a lot of international audience here. Andrew says my shirt does look orange. Yeah, I think there's a filter on my videos or my camera or something that turns it a different color than what it actually is. Okay, so you're from New Jersey, Lewis. Good to know. Good morning, Chad and Lush and Turf Nerd. Yeah, Turf Nerd. So it says that you'll check in since you have UMax and it fits today's stream. So yeah, if you're using UMax or UFlex or any stabilized nitrogen source, Mondays, actually the episode last week, Dr. Soldat and I discussed stabilized nitrogen. You might want to go back and check that too if you haven't watched it. And then all this week we're doing stabilized nitrogen. So Monday we went over it. Yesterday we went over it. Today it will actually be including both components. So it'll include both a nitrification inhibitor and a urease inhibitor in this one. So it is UFlex, I think. What is it? Yeah, UFlex. So this article contains the product with the brand name UFlex. So it's not going to be any different than yesterday or the day before or the day before that. just so you know. So if you want to go back to your Zoom meeting, basically the results are in this paper. The inclusion of UFlex provided, and this is the reason I'm including this paper, because it's so great the way they say it. It applied no value whatsoever to the turfgrass. It provided no additional benefit whatsoever. And the way the authors worded in this document is genius. I just like the way they say it, so I'm including this. Real quick. So if you have any questions, a lot of people are sending emails and great and comments, and that's all fantastic. Keep them coming. If you want to make sure that I hear it and I respond to it, I highly encourage people to use the voicemail. It's 859-444-4234. Anything that's left on there sends me a text or sends me an email, lets me know that you left something. I'll go through those and accumulate those. But just keep in mind, anything you post on there as a voicemail, I'll probably use it on the show at some point. So if you don't want to be identified, then just don't say your name or something. But I will. I'm relying upon that because there's so much information coming in at this point. I just can't keep up with it all, and so anything left on the voicemail is very likely to be addressed, and you'll make sure it'll be for certain that I get it. Also, don't forget, there's been several people last week. There's some people this week that have been using the Calendly.com services that I provide. It's a service that if you want some input or second eye on your program or some, I don't know, a different viewpoint or whatever you're looking for on your fertility program for your turfgrass, whether it's golf or lawn, sod production. I was on the phone yesterday with a sod producer, sport fields, whatever it is. If you just want a second eye to look at it and see if you're doing what you are doing is as efficient as you can make it, I'll do my best to do that for you via calendly.com/TravisShaddox. So if we go there, you don't have to even ask me about the schedules or what times are available. On calendly.com/TravisShaddox, all my times that are available are on there. It's connected to my Google Calendar. You can't see what all's on my calendar, but anytime something goes on my calendar, it removes that time slot as an available time slot for you to choose to meet with me. So you can go on there, select anything that's on there in terms of available times, and we'll sit down and go over whatever it is you want to go over, soil tests or nutrients or fertility or whatever the case is. So don't forget that. If that's something you want to take advantage of, please consider it. Okay, so as I said yesterday, about an hour into the show usually is when my voice starts to go out. So I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit so I don't lose my voice. But this article today is entitled Response of Turfgrass to Urea-Based Fertilizers Formulated to Reduce Ammonia Volatilization and Nitrate Conversion by Henning, Branham, and Mulvaney. And they're in Illinois, I think. Yeah, they're in Illinois. And this was published, again, in a journal called Biology and Fertility of Soils. I'm not particularly that familiar with that journal. I believe it's in Europe. And the only reason I mention it is the confidence I have in articles that are published in the Tri Societies or the Hort Societies or Weed Science Society, anything like that, is pretty high from the beginning. It may change after I read the article. Depends on the article. But I don't really have a whole lot of skepticism usually about the articles that are in there. There's several articles in there that are horrible, believe me. But for the most part, the vetting process, the refereed process that the articles are have to go through in order to be published are pretty firm. They're pretty strong. So in order to get in there, you have to pass, quite a few hurdles, reviewing and other people making sure, editors making sure the content is accurate and so forth. When you go outside of those societies and get into other journals, I don't have the same level of confidence as I do with the articles that are in those journals. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean they're any less valuable or anything like that. Just I don't have the same. I read those articles with a greater skepticism because I'm not really sure the value. So, for example, anything in POS, Public Library of Science, I have virtually no confidence in until I read the article, and I have to really read through it and have a lot of skepticism and understand what they did and how everything really has to be meticulously reviewed and with a great deal of skepticism, because a lot of the journal articles in that journal are junk because there's not the review process in that journal in Turfgrass Science. is nowhere near to the level in crop science and so forth. And so I refer to that as a predatory journal. They're open access. They're preying on faculty members and people that want to publish, and they're pay for service. So you got to pay to get your article in that journal. And so they'll just crank through the articles, preying on junior faculty usually because they need to get their articles in. They need to get their CV pumped up. They need to get these numbers built up for tenure and promotion, and they'll just publish wherever they need to publish to get it done. But in so doing, they end up getting taken advantage of in some journals that are referred to as predatory journals. And I'm not saying this one is. I don't even know this art journal. I'm just letting everybody know that I don't know this journal. I don't know the content or the vetting process and the refereeing process. I don't know it. I've never published in it, and I haven't read a lot of articles in it. So I'm just saying that to say that I would be careful by just publishing and saying, okay, this is what this journal found, this is what this article found, therefore it's absolute truth. I'd just be careful about that until you have a little bit more confidence. This impact factor is a 6 or a 7, which is 2 or 3 times higher than crop science. I think crop science is like 2.5 or 2.4 or something. It's not near that number. To give you an idea, the very, very highest science journals, Science and Nature, they'll be in the 40s or 50s, and even some of the medical journals will be in the hundreds. 150, I think, is the New England Journal of Medicine. I can't remember now, but they're very, very, very high. Agricultural journals don't get anywhere near those numbers. They're usually in the 2s and 3s. This journal is 6 or 7. Nothing wrong with that. It's fine. The higher the number, the better. So the impact factor gives me an indication that it's highly cited, but you can't rely upon that to immediately have confidence that the content is sound, I guess is the way to say it. So I'm just saying that to say this. I don't know this journal. Let's read through it and, see how it relates to past publications and so forth. By the way, it's going to relate exactly to past publications. That's the reason it's in here. It's funny. Okay. So response of turfgrass to urea-based fertilizers formulated to reduce ammonia volatilization and nitrate conversion. And I believe this article is actually you have to pay for it. It's not free. So you'll have to, if you want to read it, you'll have to pay for it. But you can read the abstract for free. In the last sentence of the abstract, it says, though the efficacy of urease and nitrification inhibitors has been demonstrated both in the laboratory and for row crops, inhibitors appear to be of limited value for enhancing nitrogen use efficiency in turf. How many times have you heard me say that? That's what I've said. That's what Dr. Soldat said too. I think it was last week. I mean, in row crops, it's pretty well documented that they function well and they result in greater yield. But in turfgrass, they just don't. And the last sentence of his abstract says the exact same thing I've been saying for weeks. So you can go and see that for free. You don't even have to download the whole article. You can just read the abstract for free and get a general idea of what they found. But we're going to read through. Most of this is I'm not going to read through most of this. Let's see here. Yeah, there's I don't know, a fair amount of it. We're going to read through the green parts, the highlighted parts, and you're welcome to go and download it and pay for it and and get access to it and read the whole thing if you want to. The introduction. Urea is the most common nitrogen source for turfgrass fertilization. I thought for years that it was DAP. I thought in general it was diammonium phosphate was the most common fertilizer, but I looked that up and apparently they're right. Urea is the most common fertilizer even outside the United States. So that's, it makes sense that urea would be that way, but DAP generally has a very, very high volume and usage in the United States, but for ag. But regardless, they're right. Urea is the most common. This popularity reflects the same attributes that have made urea the leading synthetic nitrogen fertilizer in world agriculture. Low cost, high nitrogen content, chemical stability, ease of handling, and water solubility. The main drawbacks arise from the limited period of urea nitrogen availability for plant uptake and from the risk of nitrogen loss from ammonia volatilization, nitrate leaching, and denitrification. So that's their case, is that it's very common. Urea is very popular. It's highly used due to its inexpensive and the high amount of nitrogen. But the drawbacks are There can be great amount of volatilization, gaseous loss either through that process or through denitrification. And there can be nitrate leaching from the use of soluble urea. I mean, for the most part, that's true. Volatilization losses can occur when urea is hydrolyzed to ammonia and carbon dioxide by the ubiquitous enzyme urease, which has numerous plant and microbial sources. Under turfgrass culture, these losses have been attributed to elevated levels of urease activity, which were reported by Torello and Werner in 1983 to be 18 to 25 times higher for Kentucky bluegrass clippings and thatch than for the underlying soil. So urease is impossible to escape from, basically. Even in virgin soils, even in gassed soils where the soil has been quote unquote sterilized, it won't take very long for that soil to be repopulated by microbes and by urease. Maybe a week or two, month at the most. You're going to have repopulation of that sterile soil. So urease is everywhere, and that's what's required. That enzyme is required to convert urea to ammonium. Okay. And they're saying it's everywhere, and it's higher in the soil. It's higher in turfgrass clippings and the thatch, 18 to 25 times higher than it is in the soil. Okay. In turf, urea nitrogen losses via volatilization have been reported to be as high as 55 to 65% by Volk in 59. The losses will be much lower if urea is incorporated into the soil profile by rainfall and irrigation. So this Volk paper, I could go into it in 59, but these values of 55 to 65% is oftentimes what you'll find on marketing sheets to scare you into thinking you're losing all your nitrogen. And you have to have this product. You have to have the urease inhibitor to reduce that volatilization so that the plant has more nitrogen. And if you lose 65% of the nitrogen from volatilization, you only have 35% left. You put out a pound, now you only have a third of a pound. You can see how that would make sense. But these volatilization numbers are astronomically high for most normal situations in turfgrass management. 55 to 65% is exceedingly high. So don't let that scare you. Don't let marketing sheets scare you into thinking you're losing half your nitrogen to volatilization. Of course, it's possible, but possible and probable are oftentimes light years apart. Okay? Losses will be much lower if urea is incorporated in the soil. Now, this Knight 2007 study, I'm going to go over this Knight 2007 study, but I'm waiting to see if I can get one of the authors to come on and go over that with me. Basically, what they found in the Knight 2007 study, in these other studies, is that a little bit of you apply urea to turfgrass, apply a little bit of water, and volatilization just basically drops to zero almost to insignificant levels. Okay. So in cases where you're applying urea and there's no irrigation, okay, and there's no ability to control the water at all, that would not, these papers would not be useful to you. In other words, they're useful knowing, okay, you put out urea, put out a little bit of water and you're good. But even in cases where you don't have control of the irrigation, there's still very little evidence that there's going to be a great deal of volatilization in turfgrass settings. Okay, a little bit of water, it's basically eliminated. For the most, practically speaking, the volatilization is zero. Without water, it can increase, it can definitely be a factor, but it's still nowhere near as it is in agricultural settings where you're dealing with bare soil. Okay, and this 55 to 65% is, it did exist in 59. They did measure that, but I wouldn't let that. That's abnormal. That's not the norm. Okay, norm is maybe 5 or 10%. Worst case scenario, maybe 20% or something in turfgrass settings. And under normal conditions, you're just not going to have these very high 50, 60% volatilization numbers. Okay. And we'll go over that. Like I said, I'm going to hold off on the Knight paper for a little bit and see if I can work that out with their schedule. One way to reduce the loss of nitrogen from urea is the inhibition of the nitrogen transformation that leads to those losses, the volatilization and leaching. The usual approach is to control the activity of urease with inhibitory compounds that delay urea hydrolysis so as to limit the accumulation of ammonium and the rise in pH that allows gaseous loss via ammonia volatilization. Okay. So that's a strategy. Well, ammonia volatilization can only occur from ammonium. And if we apply urea, it's going to convert to ammonium rapidly within a couple of days. So let's just prolong that conversion from, say, 1 or 2 days to some other length of time, a longer period of time, so that it stays in the urea form a little bit longer and reduces the volatilization, which in laboratory settings and in ag settings, that's exactly what happens. It reduces it by about half. If you're going to have 40% volatilization, you add one of these in there, you're going to have about 20% volatilization. It's going to have a significant reduction, result in a significant decrease in volatilization. That's the concept behind it, and it works in ag. But it does not, or it very rarely results in some sort of secondary benefit to the turf. In other words, I care about the volatilization, yes, but I don't get paid on that. I get paid on the turf. So what does it do to the turf? And when you think about it that way, you remove that red herring and say, okay, well, you're focused on the volatilization. You're losing 50%. You're losing 60%. We got to reduce that. We got to reduce that. So you're thinking about that. And that's what the marketing sheets want you to do. Think about this and pull your attention away from the product that we're producing. That is Turfgrass. And when you look at that, there's just not a lot there. Okay. So keep that in mind as we read through here. Stabilized urea fertilizers and commercial formulations that include an inhibitor. Stabilized urea fertilizers are commercial formulations that include an inhibitor. One such product, Uflex, is marketed specifically for turfgrass nitrogen fertilization and contains urea mixed with MBPT for urease inhibition and DCD for the nitrification inhibition. Okay, there's 2 other compounds that are commonly used or documented to have a beneficial or a reduction in volatilization and reduction in nitrification. In Uflex, they use MBPT and DCD. Another inhibitor, Nutrisphere, which there's several scientific articles that include Nutrisphere. Okay, we'll probably go over those at some point. But notice the way he words this paragraph. He words it the way you should word it. And I'm going to make sure in the yellow, I'm going to point it out how they worded this paragraph. Okay. Another inhibitor, Nutrisphere, is a copolymer of maleic acid, maleic and itaconic, I can't even pronounce those words, acids. Oh yeah, there it is. Occurring as a partial calcium salt for use as a coating to ammoniacal nitrogen fertilizers to inhibit urease nitrification and denitrification. Nutrisphere is a stable, water-soluble, slowly biodegradable and branched polymer that occurs in 30 to 40 micron lengths, I guess is what it says. So this product has been studied thoroughly, and if I need to, I'll go into all those articles, but it has basically no impact. Even what they say it does, when we just measure that straight up, it has virtually no impact. And there's 1 or 2 very good articles by a researcher in North Dakota, I think, or is it North Dakota or North Dakota State? I can't remember where he's at, where he looked at that. And I'll pull that up if necessary. But the reason I'm saying that, because there's only, in turfgrass, there's only 2 compounds that have consistently, additives, okay, we're not talking about coating materials, but 2 additives to urea that have been confirmed to reduce volatilization, and 2 additives to urea that have been confirmed to reduce nitrification. Okay, and Nutrisphere is not one of them. All right. The inhibitory properties of the material, this is Nutrisphere, reportedly arise from its highly negative charge density. For urease inhibition, this extreme anionic charge density is purported to sequester the nickel necessary for the urease enzyme to function. Nitrification and denitrification are presumably reduced due to ionic binding of antiammonium that may be generated. So this whole thing in yellow is basically the scientists, including what the manufacturer claims and doing it in a observatory language. Basically, this is what they purported. This is what it's presumed to do. This is what they reported. But in other words, they don't have any citations citing that the product actually does what it says it might do, because it's very rare that there's many articles that actually show it doesn't do what it says it does. And I'll go into that. I don't want to get in a bind over this. I'll go over that if necessary. It's not a problem. It's in the literature. All right, the hypothesis. Under turfgrass management conditions, experimental evidence is lacking that stabilized fertilizers can improve nitrogen use efficiency or reduce nitrogen losses from the sward, from turfgrass. In this work, we evaluated the effectiveness of U-Flex and Nutrisphere under turf management conditions to increase fertilizer nitrogen uptake efficiency and reduce nitrogen loss from the turf. So, pretty straightforward. They're going to look at U-Flex and they're going to look at Nutrisphere to see, how they impact the fertilizer uptake and reduce nitrogen losses from the turf. And I think they even look at quality and color in here as well, the turfgrass. The research was conducted at the University of Illinois Landscape Horticultural Research Center in Urbana, Illinois, on a 4-year-old mixed stand of Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass, maintained at 3-inch height of cut. It's an awful high height of cut for Kentucky bluegrass, but you got perennial rye in there, I guess. So, okay, the experiment was initiated on May 22nd, 2010, so about 14 years ago. A randomized complete block design was utilized with 6 replications. So 6 replications is a lot of replications in the field. That's a lot of replications anywhere, but in the field, that's a lot of replications. So they only have three treatments, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. They had 3 treatments, and that's the value of keeping the questions simple. Yeah, keeping the study simple is when you keep it simple, you can do 6 replications. Okay, so you got 3 treatments and 6 replications, so you got 18 plots. Versus some of the other studies I went over in the 80s and 90s, you'll see like 15 treatments in there. Well, 15 treatments and you got 4 replications, or you say you got 6 replications, and you're dealing with 100 and something plots. That's hard to maintain. And then the power, so let's say you're not going to be able to maintain that. So let's say you have 15 treatments and you have 4 replications. Now you got 60 plots versus 3 times 6 is 18. You got 6, you're at some point, a person, whether it's staff or faculty or students, can only maintain so many plots before it becomes insurmountable. You can't maintain them all. And so when you're dealing with something like this, it's a simple question. You got 3 treatments. You rep it 6 times. You have a very strong study. And you still have a study that you can maintain easily with 18 plots. Is no problem. Once you get to about the 40 number, 40 to 50 plots, it becomes, you have to end up getting help to maintain them. And it's hard for any one person to maintain a study like that in the field with 40 to 50 plots. So anyway, so they had 6 treatments or 6 reps. That's a lot of reps. But they only have 3 treatments, so it's not a problem. Treatments consisted of granular Nutrisphere, U-Flex, and urea formulated to commercial specifications and enriched with N15 labeled urea. Oftentimes we get this argument or debate sometimes. If we don't use N15 urea, which is expensive and it requires special training and all these other things. And so the most of the time we don't use N15 urea. And they'll say, well, you need to use a labeled, radio labeled nitrogen so you have, know exactly where you came from and all this other stuff. And we do it. I'm like, okay, we'll do it. But it doesn't change the results. You might have more confidence in the results, but the results would be the same. In other words, in this particular study, you'll find that it correlates very well with past research. It doesn't change anything because we use N15. So just because when you hear someone say, well, I know it's what you found, but I'm not going to believe it unless you use N15 labeled urea. What I would say is, no problem. Pay the money for the N15, and I'll do it with N15 labeled urea, no problem. And then when they see the price on that, they're not going to pay for it. So we just use regular urea, and we're probably going to get the same thing. I just think it's funny when I hear that argument. It's a horrible argument. But they'll argue, but they're not willing to actually sponsor the research to do it. And they don't even, whatever. I'll move on. Treatments were hand applied into the enclosure. They built an enclosure, so it's very accurate the way they applied it. And treatments were applied at 1 pound of nitrogen. To create conditions conducive to nitrogen loss by volatilization, irrigation was delayed for 1 day following application. During this period, ammonia volatilization was estimated in duplicate for each plot. So on each plot, they measured it twice on the same plot. And they didn't water anything after application to exacerbate volatilization. Leaf tissue analysis was collected weekly. At the conclusion of the study, duplicate 4 inch diameter cores were taken from each plot, and all leaf tissue was removed from the plug using scissors and prepared for total Kaldol. So they did nitrogen with total Kaldol nitrogen. To quantify fertilizer nitrogen in roots and soil, 20 1-inch diameter cores were collected from the surface, 15 centimeters, the surface 15 centimeters, so the top 15 centimeters, I guess, the top 6 inches. Yeah, so the roots and the roots and soil. Yeah, so they're just basically trying to do a mass balance, and they for the roots in the soil, they did that by taking core samples at the end of the study, I guess, is what I'm trying to see what they. Yeah, okay. Total nitrogen analysis was performed by digesting foliage, roots, and soil. So they did total nitrogen with foliage, roots, and soil by TKN, which is standard. So when we're going to refer to this plant or soil nitrogen-derived fertilizer, they're going to say NDFF, so nitrogen-derived fertilizer. And they're going to have another acronym called potentially mineralizable nitrogen, and that was quantified for soil samples. So remember these acronyms, NDFF and PMN, because I'm going to have to come back to these. I can never remember these acronyms. Turfgrass color and quality ratings were recorded every 7 days after treatment based on a scale of 1 to 9. And 6 was the minimum accepted level. It's all standard stuff. All right, so let's get to the results. I'm going to show most of the results in the paper. Then I have one PowerPoint that easily shows the color and quality. But this is pretty much easy to read. It's easy to read. It's easy to follow. Some of these articles I go over are not easy. I've mentioned that it's very difficult and it's challenging. This is not one of them. This is very easy to understand exactly what they did and exactly what they found. Losses of applied nitrogen by ammonia volatilization were detected for all treatments, but were very limited, ranging from 0.01 to 1%. The average was 0.04% of applied nitrogen. And they didn't even show it. They just said data not shown. Losses of this magnitude, so less than 1%, were deemed biologically insignificant, and the data were not subjected to statistical analysis. So in other words, the volatilization was so low, they just said, they scrapped it. There was no volatilization, even under a condition where they attempted to exacerbate volatilization by not applying any irrigation. Okay. For the first day, or the day after they applied the urea. They let it sit there in an environment that should be very conducive to volatilization. So they didn't water it in. And the volatilization was still, on average, only 0.04% of what they applied. So there wasn't much volatilization at all. There was a little bit from every treatment, but it was so low that it was deemed insignificant. No significant differences in clipping yields were detected among fertilizer treatments throughout the course of the study. So there was no difference in clipping yields. Okay? All treatments exhibited a rapid increase in turf color and quality following nitrogen fertilization, although no differences in either color or quality were observed throughout the trial. I'm going to show this in a graph. The increase in color and quality occurred until 3 weeks after application, after which both parameters remained relatively stable for the remainder of the study. No treatment differences were detected for total nitrogen in the shoots throughout the course of the study. So we got no differences on volatilization. We got no differences on color. We've got no differences on quality. And we've got no differences on nitrogen in the shoots. But we've got a big difference in the paycheck we had to pay, or the bill we had to pay when we bought that U-Flex. I can tell you that much. Isotopic analysis of total nitrogen digests for the N15 labeled nitrogen showed no significant differences for the nitrogen-derived fertilizer. Is that what it says? Nitrogen derived from fertilizer in the shoots. So even the N15 didn't show there's any differences. Similarly, no treatment differences were observed over the study period in the fertilizer and nitrogen use efficiency by the shoots. At the conclusion of the study, about 20% of the N15 applied had been recovered in the shoots. That's in the ballpark. That's probably a little low. Usually like to see it around half of what we applied. This is where I am, guys. About half of what we applied, around that number, is generally a good number to assume. So if we apply a pound over that, as that pound is out there and being taken up by the turf, roughly speaking, we'd have about half of that taken up into the plant. They had 20%. I mean, it's not unheard of, but it might be a little bit on the low end. Okay, for roots, no significant treatment differences were observed at 56 days after treatment in total nitrogen derived from fertilizer, or fertilizer nitrogen use efficiency. And they didn't even show the data because there was no differences in the roots. So we're batting zero at the moment with this study. There's the inclusion of an extremely expensive nitrogen source compared to urea hasn't given us any return on the money spent yet. Okay, let's keep going. A parallel evaluation for soil plus roots, table 3 here, revealed no treatment differences in total nitrogen for the surface 3 inches or subsurface, say 3 to 6 inches or whatever that is. I can't do this math in my head very quick. Or in nitrogen derived from fertilizer that was around 1% of the surface layer. So there's nothing going on there either. There's soil plus roots. The last part of the results, no treatment differences were detected in estimating PMN. What is PMN? Potentially mineralizable nitrogen. So no treatment differences were detected in estimating potentially mineralizable nitrogen by the ISNT. I don't know what. See, they got all these acronyms. It's too much to handle when you have that many. It takes away from it. Illinois soil nitrogen test. So just by the soil nitrogen test for the surface or subsurface soil samples. So let me start off. No treatment differences were detected in estimating the potentially mineralizable nitrogen at the surface or subsurface at 56 days after treatment. Nor was there any significant treatment effect on mineral nitrogen recovered from these depths as exchangeable ammonium and nitrate or nitrite, since no more than trace amounts of labeled were recovered in these nitrogen pools. So remember yesterday we had this paper where we looked at ammonium and nitrate at these different soil depths and different times. And remember the idea, the mechanism behind these nitrification inhibitors and urease inhibitors, the stabilized nitrogen, is that you'll maintain more nitrogen in the urea form a little bit longer, delay the conversion to ammonium, and then you'll also maintain it in the ammonium form with the addition of DCD, delay the conversion of nitrate. So you should have greater quantities of ammonium and less quantity of nitrate compared to urea. So when for the DCD. So in other words, there should be a difference between ammonium and nitrate in the soil when you use a stabilized nitrogen source compared to when you don't. And what they found is they didn't find that. And the same thing happened yesterday. There was one or two instances when there was a difference. Sometimes it was the DCD resulted in greater ammonium, which it should, and sometimes it didn't. And actually, sometimes urea resulted in greater ammonium. So it ended up being basically a wash. And probably you can go back and look at the paper. 80 or 90% of the time, there were no differences at all. The stabilized nitrogen additive provided no impact or no change in the ammonium or nitrate compared to urea. And that's what they found here. There was no differences. Somewhat greater recovery of fertilizer N15 labeled nitrogen occurred in the potentially mineralizable nitrogen than in mineral nitrogen. So there was a little bit greater recovery in the potentially mineralizable nitrogen, averaging 0.004% for the surface soil and 0.0005% for the subsurface soil. As with mineral nitrogen, these recoveries were deemed biologically insignificant. So if you want to pay $1,100 a ton for a 0.0005% increase in subsurface potentially mineralizable nitrogen, then go ahead, I guess. That's what they found. They said it was biologically insignificant, which I agree with. That's the difference between, or that's the importance of recognizing the value of what is statistically significant compared to what is biologically significant. That one could occur while the other doesn't, and vice versa. Okay. While there is ample evidence that urease and nitrification inhibitors can retard the conversion of urea to nitrogen forms subject to loss, the data presented here suggests that inhibitors do not significantly reduce fertilizer nitrogen loss in turf. So if you're listening and you're distracted, listen up to the next sentence. For the multiple parameters evaluated in our work, neither Uflex nor Nutrisphere provided any benefit beyond standard urea. So this is the second or third paper where there's been such a terse comment made. I mean, it's straight to the point. Okay. I mean, there's no benefit. I love it when authors write that stuff. I don't have the nerve or the guts to do that. The courage. I don't have the courage to do that, but I like it when other people do. In the present study, there were no differences in any measured parameter between unamended and stabilized urea fertilizers. Since the experiment did not include an unfertilized control, no definitive assessment can be made as to the fertilizer nitrogen response. Still, turfgrass fertilizer nitrogen use efficiency did not differ among Uflex, Nutrisphere, and unamended urea, demonstrating comparable nitrogen loss for each treatment and also comparable uptake of unlabeled soil nitrogen. Overall, I want to talk about these graphs, but it seems like I'm skipping it. Overall, approximately 60% of the applied nitrogen could not be accounted for regardless of treatment, and begs the question as to why the stabilized products did not have their intended effect on boosting nitrogen efficiency over that of unamended urea. So they're saying, well, why did this happen, basically? It should have had something, but something should have happened, but nothing happened. The low fertility capping material should have increased fertilizer nitrogen response, and the excessive rainfall in June was conducive to nitrogen loss, yet the two stabilized fertilizers performed no better than unamended urea. Let's look at the graphs, because I think I'm skipping them. I don't want to skip through these because I want to make sure I go over them. So here's the clipping yield for those listening. I'm looking at a bar chart here. The black, you can't quite see it here, but this black right here is Nutrisphere. The dotted one is Uflex, and then the white one is urea. And we have days after treatment on the x-axis and clipping yields on the y-axis. And you can simply say after they apply the urea, you can see that the yield goes up, clipping yields goes up as the turf grass grows. And then in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, well, after the peak occurred, the peak was there for a couple of weeks. At about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the peak, and then it started to drop off at about 5 weeks. About 5 weeks out, the clipping yield began to decline and then stayed fairly low. Okay. And there were no differences between any of these nitrogen sources in clipping yield. There's another graph down here. I'm going to get to the quality here. This is the leaf tissue nitrogen graph, the same thing where we have Nutrisphere, Uflex, and urea. And the nitrogen concentrations in the leaf tissue, grams of nitrogen. Okay, so grams of nitrogen. So this is, you can just move this decimal over and call it a percent. So 4% was roughly at the beginning, and it stayed at about 4%. And about 5-6 weeks out, it began to decline, and it declined slowly until about 3% nitrogen in the tissue. And all of them were the same. All the nitrogen sources, Nutrisphere and Uflex and urea, were the same, not only statistically, but biologically. There was no difference between these two, or between those three. And then this is the fertilizer in uptake efficiency of leaf tissue over the course of the experimental period. This is the percent uptake here. And I just want to point out that the sum of the percent uptake, remember they said is about 20%. And between Nutrisphere, Uflex, and urea, you can see all of them are at 20%. That's just all I wanted to point out there. Now, what I want to do is I want to go to this, let me go to this first. And what I want to do is go to the PowerPoint. I want to show the quality on this slide here. So we're looking at the same data. There was a table in there that was oriented in an odd fashion. So I just put the data onto this PowerPoint figure here. And we're looking at a line graph with days of treatment on the x-axis and turfgrass color from 1 to 9 on the y-axis. And the x-axis, days after treatment, goes from 1 week, 7 days, out to about 8 weeks. Okay. We have Nutrisphere, Uflex, urea, and then we have the red line being minimal acceptable. Remember the red line, anything above this red line is going to be deemed acceptable by the researchers. And we just want to point out there's no differences. There were no differences statistically or biologically on any of these treatments. There's a little bit of a drop here with Uflex at the 7 week mark, but this is not significant statistically or biologically. They all were above 6 they were below 6 until about 10 days. But about 10 days after the application, the quality of all these plots were fine. From 1 pound of nitrogen from urea, Uflex, and Nutrisphere in Urbana, Illinois. I also want to point out that the longevity, look at the longevity, guys and gals. It went up. This is the way I measured this nitrogen cost study, by the way, that I went over a couple weeks ago. As soon as it goes above this line, I started counting days. And as soon as it keep going. And then whenever it did go back down below that 6 point line is when I stopped the clock and I counted this total area and total length of time. That's how I did that study, by the way, if you guys are interested in that. Anyway, in this study, look, it's urea, it's Uflex and Nutrisphere. And look, 1 pound of urea lasted, it resulted in a turfgrass quality out to 56 days. Now, it didn't get above the point. So let's say it didn't get above it until 10 days. So let's say 46 days. And the quality is still at a 7. And that's when they stopped taking the quality rating or the color ratings. So this is why I've said for many, over and over and over, is that it's very difficult to financially compete with urea because the turfgrass response to urea is much, much longer than most people expect. And there's much longer than the slow release fertilizer manufacturers and distributors will tell you. They'll say, if they say, hey, this is a slow release SCU or slow release polymer coat or whatever, and it's going to last, 45 days or 60 days. Well, the urea right here lasted 46 days and it was still going. It was just straight urea at 1 pound. Okay. So what am I going to get by spending more money on a polymer coat or a reacted or a natural organic or whatever? And they may have an answer for that. What I would say, I just haven't seen it in the literature that consistently. There are cases clearly where I can show you where there is some additional longevity, but it's not going to be anywhere remotely close to offsetting the cost. Okay. Now let's go back to the PowerPoint. We're going to look at quality. This was color. Now we look at quality, and with the quality is essentially the same. There's a little bit of a drop here at the end, but that wasn't significant between these nitrogen sources. All this was statistically the same. It was the same as color, basically. It went up above quality line at 10 days, and it was still above quality out to 56 days after application. Okay, so when we step back away from the indoctrination and the marketing schemes and all these, all this stuff that they throw at you, when you step back away and look at it and go, well, if we don't do that and we say, well, yeah, I want my nitrogen to last, whatever, 60 days or 90 days. I want it to last that long. Well, yeah, that sounds good. In theory, it sounds good, but I don't think you really care about that. I think what you care about is the turfgrass response to that nitrogen source. I mean, when I say it like that, everybody's going to say, yes, well, duh, we get that, Travis. But oftentimes we lose sight of it. They like to use these red herrings to distract us away from our vision and our goal. This nitrogen source should last, 90 days. Well, show me how it competes against urea. Because urea is lasting a lot longer than what you might expect. Okay? Let's go back to the PowerPoint or the PDF. That's all I wanted to show you on the PowerPoint. And okay, where did I go here? I'm on nowhere I left off. Oh, I left off right here. Okay. And so that quality and color was this for those watching, it was this table here that's oriented landscape-wise, so it's hard to read. So I put it on that figure. The beneficial effect of Uflex and Nutrisphere in reducing volatilization of urea nitrogen was expected based on the previous field studies demonstrating the effectiveness of MBPT and the Nutrisphere copolymer for this purpose. I didn't expect it, just so you know. To increase the potential for liberation of ammonia, urea hydrolysis was allowed to occur on the soil surface by delaying irrigation for 24 hours after fertilizing. Yet surprisingly, ammonia volatilization during this period was negligible, even with the unamended urea. This finding is inconsistent with previous reports of substantial ammonia loss from fertilized turf. But soil differences probably account for the disparity between their study and some other study. So they're saying in the past, historically, in the literature, you'll find some volatilization. They didn't. So it is what it is. Let's go to the next paragraph now, or the next little section here. The ineffectiveness of Uflex, as reported herein, is in contrast to the findings of Jew in 87. Now, this Jew paper in 87 is one paper. There's about 3 papers by Nick Christensen's program in the late 80s, early 90s that have some information in there about a beneficial response by using the stabilized nitrogen sources. And I'll get into those. Like I said in the previous episode, I'm showing this side of the story, and then I'll show some that there is some benefit. Okay, I don't think that's a substantial enough of a benefit to offset the cost, but there is something there in 1 or 2 studies. Well, I think there's actually 3 studies. But that same program published another paper where there wasn't a benefit, and you'll see many, many more papers indicating that very rarely is there ever going to be a beneficial response to the turfgrass by using stabilized nitrogen sources. And I don't know of one study that has shown a response large enough to offset the additional cost of using stabilized nitrogen sources compared to just using straight urea. It may exist, I'm just not familiar with it. So the Jew paper in 1987 they had reports that contrasted this work and Kentucky bluegrass with unlabeled urea and differing enrichments of MBPT, so they were using different rates. Their results showed an increase in clipping yields with the inhibitor that ranged from 20 to 27% and was greatest during the summer when hot weather would have promoted ammonia volatilization. In a study of perennial ryegrass, Watson in 1990 used MBPT and led to a 20% increase in recovery estimated by the difference method and 8.8% higher dry matter yield 7 weeks after a single application of urea that was supplied 2 pounds of nitrogen. So there were some studies saying there were some studies that showed the benefit. Mosdell in 87 or 86, we went over this paper, I believe, the Mosdell 86 paper, evaluated the effectiveness of DCD in reducing urea nitrogen conversions to nitrate in a field study with Kentucky bluegrass and concluded that the DCD was effective for such a short period that its use would seldom be justified for turfgrass. Yeah, we did go over that paper and look back a day or two, and it was one of those papers that we went over. Waddington in 89 came to a similar conclusion that DCD is of no value for increasing fertilizer nitrogen use efficiency in turf unless applied at an unrealistically excessive rate. And I think we went over the Waddington paper too, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I need to zoom this out. Okay, no color or quality response was observed in our work with Uflex and Nutrisphere relative to the use of unamended urea. This finding is consistent with previous research by Mosdell in 86, documenting no positive effect of DCD to turfgrass color and quality. Similarly, the lack of turf response to Nutrisphere in the present study leads to the same conclusion reached by Mosdell in 86 in regard to DCD, so nothing happened. So it was saying some studies showed something different, some studies showed something similar to what we found, and we found what we found. Now we're going to go to the last little part here and then we're done. With and without inhibition, there was very little fertilizer nitrogen recovery in the soil nitrogen pool studied. For total soil nitrogen recovery of N15 labeled nitrogen was greater in the surface than in the subsurface layer, okay? There was no effect of inhibition on potentially mineralizable nitrogen estimated by this nitrogen soil test, and the only trace N15 recovered was in this fraction, regardless of whether urea, Uflex, or Nutrisphere had been applied. That's what we mentioned, is that there's such a small amount that they recovered. They didn't even show the data. So there's some things in red here that I'm going to read, which is the reason why I picked this paper. this last little bit here. So I'm gonna sum this up here, and we're gonna be done here shortly. But listen up, because these last couple of sentences are great. I love these. I love this stuff. At the conclusion of the 8-week study, the inhibitors proved to be of no value for decreasing nitrate concentrations relative to unamended urea. There's no value. I love that. Similar findings have been reported from previous studies with Kentucky bluegrass. I already mentioned all that stuff. Okay. Waddington in 89 repeatedly applied DCD during a 3-year study that involved periodic samplings of soil inorganic nitrogen. But of 56 evaluations, there were only 5 that showed an elevated ammonium and 3 were reduced nitrate level. I think that's the one we went over. I talked about sometimes it increased it, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the other one increased it when it shouldn't have. Regardless of fertilizer treatments, inorganic soil nitrogen accounted for only trace recoveries of N15 in the present study. So here's the last sentence in red. So listen up. I haven't ever heard a conclusion worded this way. I don't know these authors. Let me see. Mulvaney and maybe I've heard those names. I don't know if I've ever met them. I'm going to have to shake their hand next time I see them. I just like the way they worded this. The total lack of significant treatment differences for every parameter studied leads us to conclude that the urease and nitrification inhibitors used were of no value for reducing nitrogen loss of urea nitrogen applied to turfgrass and did not offer any advantages over unamended urea. I can barely say that sentence without laughing. I mean, it's fantastic. I love that. In one respect, however, this conclusion must be qualified since the study site was managed under irrigation and thus volatilization losses may have been reduced. Under irrigated turf conditions, little, if any, advantage can be expected from the use of urease inhibitor. So they qualify the end there with their statement at the end. So they didn't irrigate it at the beginning to allow for volatilization, but they did irrigate it following that. So under those conditions, they found a total lack of significant differences, and this is of no value whatsoever. That's firm language. That's really firm language. So anyway, that's the Henny, Branham, and Mulvaney study from 2013. So in the short, they did a study in Illinois with N15 labeled nitrogen. They looked at soil nitrogen, they looked at plant nitrogen, they looked at plant response, and they found nothing. They found no advantage, no beneficial effect from using stabilized nitrogen compared to just using straight urea. And to make matters worse, to make the argument even worse for the stabilized nitrogen sources, let's say they had a beneficial impact. Let's say the quality went from 7 to, 8 or something. Let's say that happened. That's still, in my view, not a very strong position to hold if you're going to try to offset the additional cost. Like I've said before, you can go back to the cost paper. The cost of this was at the time in 2000, when was it, 2020 or 21, I can't remember. The cost of this was $11.50 a ton compared to urea at $6.35 a ton. And don't quote me on that. So come back or go read that article. I may be wrong on those exact numbers. But it was double to use a stabilized nitrogen source compared to urea. So if you want to pay double for your urea source to gain a half a unit, we didn't find a half unit quality, but let's say you did. Let's say you did see a full unit from 7 to 8. They're all acceptable. All the turfgrass is acceptable. But you're going to get a little bit deeper color using a nitrogen source that cost $1,150 a ton compared to $635 a ton. Do you want to pay for that return? That's up to you. I wouldn't. I would never apply Uflex or Umax or any stabilized nitrogen on my property ever. I don't see the point in it. But when there is, which is extremely rare, I don't even know if there is a case where it resulted in a greater quality. But even if it did occur, you'd have to look at it and go, okay, well, do I really want to pay that much money to get that additional increase? That'd be up to you. And we just don't see that. The longevity from my paper last week didn't show that Uflex resulted in any greater longevity of acceptable turf. It didn't show that urea or Uflex resulted in any greater increase in quality compared to urea. The stabilized nitrogen sources just didn't provide any additional longevity or any additional magnitude of response from that paper. And then the paper on Monday basically said the same thing. The paper yesterday said the same thing. The paper today says the same thing. You're not seeing any additional longevity. You're not seeing any additional magnitude of increase. You're not seeing any additional uptake of nitrogen in the leaf tissue, increase in yields. We're just not seeing that. And you're paying a lot for that. But even if you did see that, you would have to balance that out and go, okay, do I really want to pay that much more money to get that increase? And that's what we're going to find in some of the Jew papers where they do show an increase. There was a increase in yield. I think there was even an increase in quality. I haven't read those papers in a little while. But there was a beneficial impact by using stabilized nitrogen sources. And I'll show that. Keep that in mind, is that, yes, there's a difference. There's a benefit. Do you want to pay that much money to get it? That's up to you. Okay, guys. Any questions before I go? Half-Life Lawn. Thank you for doing this. This industry and others desperately need scientific direction. So well, you're welcome. Very welcome. I'm glad to do it. Keep in mind, I think it was Abraham Lincoln actually started the land grant institution system thing. And I think every state has I know every state has a land grant institution. I think it was 1862 or 1863. I can't remember. And some of them even have two land grant institutions. And so there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help. I don't know if you feel comfortable contacting them or not. Maybe you just feel comfortable listening to YouTube. That's fine, whatever. But keep in mind that many professional scientists are available to help you. They just may be busy doing other things and sitting in front of a camera talking to YouTube. But I'm just one. And I'm retired. I don't even do much anymore. I do a little bit of, goofy research on the side. That's about it. Jonathan Tierman. It's hard for me to read that on the screen. Sorry. What nitrogen source is best in soil temps below 55? Well, that's going to depend, but below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, I wouldn't be putting out a whole lot of nitrogen. In other words, I'm thinking, when you say that, I'm thinking the turf grass is going into the winter. It's going from fall to winter. If that's the case and the soil temperatures are going down, the turf grass is going down in terms of its growth and color, then I wouldn't be applying hardly any nitrogen because it's going into dormancy in the winter. Now, on the flip side, we're about to be coming into the spring in a month, and the temperatures are going up, where it's going to be going from below 55 degrees to above 55 degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, the soil temperatures are moving up and the turf grass is coming out of dormancy. Then that's another situation. So in one situation, I wouldn't be applying any nitrogen as you're moving below it, but as you're moving above it and the turf starts to grow, then I would be considering applying nitrogen. And in most cases, it's going to be urea. Okay. Louis Castellucci, you're going to be using urea this season for the first time. Okay, good. Well, we'll see how it goes. I guess I'm going to have egg on my face if everybody goes out and starts applying it and there's problems. Don't forget, if you apply something and you don't see a response, or you apply something and you do see a response, does not necessarily mean it was from that. Okay, we want to be careful. Just like the Super Bowl field a year ago. Oh, it was a disaster and the turf grass is horrible. No, it just happened to be that they used that specific turf grass that year and the conditions were right and they had a problem, but it wasn't due to that. But they connected the two because the rooster crows and the sun comes up. Therefore, the rooster causes the sun to come up. So be careful about connecting too many things. Okay. I have a great deal of confidence that you'll be just fine, but it may be some strange situation comes up and the turf grass would have performed good anyway without the urea. Or the turf grass would have performed poorly even with the urea. So you just want to be a little bit aware that the conditions oftentimes dictate what will happen to the turf grass: the water, the light, and the temperature. Don't forget those three will have a greater impact on your turf grass than anything you apply to it, really, other than if you're going to kill it, you're going to spray non-selective on it or something like that. But in general, the water, light, and the temperature are what run the show. Okay, guys. I'm going to go. I won't be back tonight. I'm going to have a dinner date with my wife. And I don't know if I'm going to be on this week. I have not got any communication from the other author about maybe coming on this week. So if I'm on this week, it'll be Thursday or Friday. But if I'm not on, then I'll see you back again on Monday. And before I go, before I forgot to tell you guys, I'm going to leave you guys with a song that was sang by probably one of the greatest country music singers of all time. Don't hang up yet, okay? Just because I said country music, okay? But to me, he was one of the greatest country music singers. I'm not a country music fan at all. But to me, the greatest song that he ever sung was written in 1967. And it has nothing to do with country music at all. It was written by somebody else. They performed it. And their performance is now known as the performance of this particular song. So I hope you enjoy it. I'll maybe see you Thursday or Friday. If not, it'll be Monday. Until then, everybody have a nice week and be kind, and I'll see you next time.